Welcome everyone to the 30-minute Midas touch from beautiful Dyersburg, Tennessee at the Herb Welsh Wrestleplex. Now, here is pound for pound and inch for inch, the best of the best in professional wrestling today. A wrestling genius worth his weight in gold. The Golden Boy, Greg Anthony.
Welcome everybody to the latest edition of the 30-minute Midas touch. With me, as always, is my co-host, Mr. Montreal, Mark Tipton.
Mr. Montreal. Well, I want to thank you for that introduction. I want to thank you for starting this off with a laugh because the subject matter of today's 30-minute Midas Touch podcast is one that, for me, is not a laughing matter at all. It is something that gets me very agitated very quickly. It is one of the most talked about events in pro wrestling history. It's an event that spawned 100 or more bad imitations from promotions all over the world. Even as recently as AEW, we saw a variation of this event, an homage, I guess you want to say, take place recently. And the event I'm talking about is Survivor Series 1997, which took place, of course, in Montreal. Dramatic pause, Quebec, Canada. And on that night occurred the event which came to more popularly be known to wrestling fans as the Montreal Screwjob. It's been discussed everywhere far and wide, and it's something I feel like it's appropriate for us to discuss here. And so I want to get your overall view on it right off the top. The Montreal Screwjob, what were your impressions of the Montreal Screwjob?
The Montreal Screwjob, in my professional opinion, is the biggest work in professional wrestling history. Obviously, we don't have firsthand knowledge of any of this stuff, as very few people do, but from a professional that's been in this business for 21 years and looking upon it, I tend to lean towards it's a work. It is one of the, and like I said, the greatest work of all time, because here we are, that was 1997, and here we are so many years later, and everyone's still talking about it, and there's still YouTube videos dedicated to it. There's still podcasts like this one dedicated to it. So its lasting impression is obviously that reaches far and wide, and it's reached all the way to the 30-minute Midas touch this week. So yeah, in my opinion, it is a work.
All right. Well, let's go along that subject. That is certainly something that there has been theories expounded upon on podcasts, among other places, and among wrestling fans just talking, wrestling message boards and whatnot. It's great. Was it a work? And there's been theories and shoot videos and all sorts of things, getting interviews from all different perspectives. And I guess one of the things is, I want to say, well, let's just get your perspective. How widely do you think it was known that this was actually a work?
Yeah, if you're going to work something of this magnitude, then you try to keep it as close-knit as possible. So, like, my opinion is that it was just Vince and Brett. They wanted to work the entire wrestling industry. In 1997, this is still very new to, the internet dirt sheets and what all is going on. But I think that they took it upon themselves to work this and work all the wrestlers, work all the boys, work the entire industry for themselves and mainly for money, for Brett to have more money, for Vince to be, out from under, Bret Hart as a talent and that kind of contract that he would have had to have made then. So yeah, for me it's very close knit. I don't think Shawn knew. I don't think Briscoe knew, because I think everyone else's reaction was genuine except for Bret and Vince.
All right. Well, looking at it that way, and I certainly see your perspective and think it's very convincing. I guess the thing it first brings up for me is what you're talking about is the phrase I've heard used before is working the locker room. Mm-hmm. Are there any potential pitfalls of doing that? Because, that the locker room may or may not respond favorably to realizing they've been worked. Do you, and you could tell me far better, how do you think a locker room, let's say, well, famously, I just watched Wrestling with Shadows this morning, and I was reminded that the following day for Raw, Mick Foley did not show up for the Raw taping that day. How do you feel that people in the locker room would react to this?
Yeah, and that's one of the things you take that chance. You know, you don't know how people are going to react. They're going to react however, you know, personally they react to. They're going to all have different reactions. You know, some people are obviously going to take their boss's side. Some people are going to take Brett's side because that's their friend. So, and that's kind of one of those things you just when you're doing something of that magnitude, you have to take the lumps with it. You know, like you said, Mick Foley wasn't at Raw the next day, but like, you know, for me, you know, even back then, I was a kid. I wasn't in the business in 1997. So, like, even as a kid, like, I was still on Vince's side through most of it, because to me it was the situation of, yeah, it's a time-honored tradition. If you're leaving, whether you're leaving to go to another company or you're retiring or whatever it is, you leave on your back, period. And I understand the personal situations with Shawn and Brett led into a lot of that, but that also to me leads into a lot of the situations why it was worked. You understand? Like, all these questions come up, like, you know, why was Brett even the champion? If this was the thought in Vince McMahon's mind that, hey, maybe, you know, I don't want Brett around for this contract because, you know, he's a smart guy. If I don't want him around, then why is he even champion at this point? Like, there's some reports that Vince knew around King of the Ring time that he was maybe going to get, you know, he didn't want to be under this 20-year contract, as they say, that they never disclosed the actual amount, by the way. They just say it was a smaller figure than what WCW was offering, and WCW was offering 3 years, $3 million a year for $9 million, basically. But Vince was signing him to a 20-year deal for less money, but it was a 20-year deal. But they never specified what it was, so that's kind of suspicious too, right? So, but Vince knew around King of the Ring time that maybe I want to get out from under this 20-year contract, but then he goes on to SummerSlam and wins the title, right? And basically painted himself into that corner. Now, you know, we've heard a lot about Vince McMahon. Has stupid been a part of this at all? You know, like Vince McMahon, and that's kind of the situation too. Like, I believe that Vince and Brett both are way too smart to put themselves in this bad situation that they were in, where Vince had a champion that he couldn't get the title off of, and Brett in a situation where he wanted to leave without having to put over Shawn Michaels. I think they're just both of them are too smart to put themselves in that situation, and I think there's a lot of evidence to prove that theory.
All right. Well, for me, you just opened up 2 or 3 different questions and things I want to go at, and that have puzzled me for some time, and I've thought about. I guess first, let me approach the business aspect. We've mentioned the contract a couple of times. Now, what was mentioned in the, I almost hesitate to say documentary, but the documentary Wrestling with Shadows, is it is alleged that WCW had offered him a 3-year at $3 million per year, a total of $9 million. That was the contract that had been offered as his WWF contract, WWF at the time, as it was coming to an end, and Vince had offered this kind of hazy 20-year contract.
Also, I want to point out before you get into that, also, they made that a segment on Raw. Like, what is Brett going to do? Is Brett going to leave, or is Brett going to stay with the WWF? And they did this whole thing like Vince didn't know at the desk, like, what's going on. So to me, that's suspicious as well. Like,
right? Why would he allow that to happen on live television?
Right. If he hates WCW to the extent that he hated it, and you know, obviously, the point was too that WCW was kicking WWE's ass so bad. That's why he wanted to get out of that contract, right? So like, why give him the rub any way, shape, or form in that direction, right? It's just go ahead. But there's so many.
Okay. Well, I want to let you get this out because your perspective on this to me is far more important than mine, and I like to let you go on it. But like I said, I start wanting to ask you three other questions as you're speaking, so I will try to contain myself over here. The thing that let me see. I'm trying to think of how I want to say this. Because the thing that came up as I watched Wrestling with Shadows this morning is they pointed out something I had forgotten. Brett had apparently agreed to stay with the WWF, had foregone that and said, hey, I kind of became a star here. I'm committed here. I've been here 14 years. This is where I want to stay. I'm a WWF guy, so to speak. And then allegedly, Vince came back to him later and said, hey, I got to get out of this contract. A, do you believe that actually happened? And B, well, let me just let you go with that first. Do you believe that actually happened?
No, I really think that his contract was coming up in '96, and yeah, he had an opportunity to either go to WCW or stay with the WF, and WCW did offer him a 3-year, $3 million per $9 million deal, and I think Brett, I think he's really trying to wind down by this time, right? So I think that him and Vince conspired together to try to milk more money out of WCW, right? So I think they came up with this scenario where, hey, we'll sign you to this, and then we'll create a scenario where you get stolen away pretty much from the WWF, and that'll make you even hotter, and they'll pay more money to get you, right? Because also you got to look at the situation too. Okay, first of all, very rarely have I ever heard of Vince McMahon making a deal and then going back on his deal. Whatever deal he's made, he's pretty much stuck to that I'm aware of, right? And then also, he's going to offer Bret Hart at 39 years old a 20-year deal. Like, he never offered a Hogan a 20-year deal or anybody like that. So why would Bret Hart at 39 at the time be worth a 20-year deal? And I could see Bret Hart at 25 maybe, and they know they're going to make him a star and know he's going to do this, this, and this, but no one really knows that for sure, obviously. But at 39, you're going to offer him a 20-year deal? It just doesn't make any sense, right? So, I think they conspired together to kind of drive up the price. And a lot of people, in the documentary, I watched Wrestling with Shadows too, to beef up for this. And, they say that, he signed the 3-year, $9 million deal. But, when you actually do research, I found an article where it said that Bret had actually, when Goldberg ended his career, that Goldberg had costed him $15 million. Right? So that means he signed a bigger deal. That means he signed a deal because he had already made about $9 million when he got kicked. Right? So that means he was signed a $24 million deal at some point. So, math-wise, something doesn't add up, right? So I think they got a bigger deal, and I think they used all that to their advantage.
All right, and I do hope I have my history right here. Just for perspective, that kick we're talking about where Goldberg attempted to do a super kick and shortened, if not outright ended, Bret Hart's career, that occurred at Starrcade 1999, which was just over 2 years after the Montreal Screwjob. Yeah. So doing the math off what was originally mentioned versus what was said there, the $15 million does say that, hey, there's good reason to think that maybe we didn't get the full story there. And I guess I want to go back into the booking aspects of all this. You meant, as you were talking about, why would you put yourself in this position? I was thinking one of the well, let me put it this way. One of the arguments that Bret Hart was making in this documentary about why he did not want to lose to Shawn was, I did not want to do it in Canada. Now, I will admit, this is where I'm going to judge a little opinion, so I'm subject to criticism for this. That was never a compelling argument to me. Even if Bret Hart got beat in the middle of the ring for the championship, I don't think it would hurt his standing in Canada. I think Bret Hart in Canada is forever. But one of his arguments that came up several times is, well, I don't mind doing this, but I don't want to do it in Canada. Do you think that was a actual reason, or do you think it was an excuse for something else?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. like I said, I think if you got to look at this from, if this is all a work and it's all predetermined, and they're trying to work the situation to their advantage, well, that's a really good excuse, right? Oh, I don't want to do it in Canada. But here's another kicker. Bret he said in the documentary that he had the last 30 days, he had complete creative control of how he went in and went out, right? So if Bret didn't go out like he wanted to go out, then he could have sued Vince for breach of contract, right? Well, that never happened. You would think, as mad as everyone was and everything that was going on, and like he had talked about, this kind of being a swan song kind of thing, going to WCW and taking all this money, if he had another chance to tack on another couple $1 million just by suing Vince for being screwed like he apparently was, then why wouldn't he do that, right? So yeah, the argument of not in Canada, I think he just used that as a veiled excuse to not want to put over Shawn, because obviously Shawn didn't want to put him over several times, and they had this huge, tumultuous history together, So I think that may have been just a primary excuse for it. And that's another thing, another situation too, like another way Vince painted himself in the corner. You understand? Like, not only did he put the title on Bret when he knew he was on his way out, maybe, but then he's going to try to put him against Shawn Michaels and expect him to, the one particular guy that he's not going to do business for. He could have literally picked anyone else. He could have picked Owen. He could have put British Bulldog, Taker, anybody. You know what I mean? I think he would have done the favor for, but not Shawn Michaels. So it's almost like Cornette, says it wasn't a work, and there's no way, and everyone that believes it, blah, blah, blah. But he's saying it worked out too perfectly for everyone after it to be a work, right? And I think it worked out, because it worked out so perfectly, and it's all too, in line, that makes it the work. You know what I mean? So like, just to me, I'm always going to lean towards more of that.
All right. Well, thank you. That answer, you actually hit on several things that I have long suspected. As I was sitting there watching that documentary, it really felt to me more about Shawn Michaels than it was about Canada. The Canada, every time he said it, I almost cringed because it did not ring true to me. Now, for younger wrestling fans who listen to this, the Shawn Michaels you've known now is a far different person than the Shawn Michaels who was involved in the WWF in 1997. And many people have mentioned this, including Shawn Michaels himself. The person who came that we saw, to me, I consider WrestleMania 14 kind of a break point of his career. Because after WrestleMania 14, we did not see him for approximately 4 years, or maybe a little more. I may be off a little bit on my time. But to me, the Shawn Michaels of that time period versus the one after WrestleMania 14 was a totally different animal. He was difficult to get along with. He was not, he was not known as a professional. And so that rang more true to me than other things. And I do appreciate, at the risk of disagreeing with Jim Cornette, which
we try not to do,
that's something you do with trepidation. But you mentioned the Taker as well. I watched an interview with Taker where he mentioned, hey, I would have been happy to just, let me get the title, and then I can put Shawn over a little bit later. I would have, he mentioned he would have been fine doing so. That stuck out to me. But I suppose one of the things that you mentioned, the final 30 days of Bret Hart's contract, allegedly, included a clause that gave him a level of reasonable creative control. Now, creative control is something that was a hot button issue for me because of, as soon as I hear that phrase, I'm reminded of the demise of WCW, which is something that because it played heavily into the demise of WCW. And I'm curious, do you think that Vince McMahon would, in all honesty, would ever allow any talent to have a contract that entitled them to any level of creative control, giving his iron grip on the direction of WWE historically? Is that something you think he would allow to happen? And let me just, I'm really going to stretch this. I'm filibustering, and I apologize. But is it something that you think is good for professional wrestling to allow talent to have something like a creative control clause?
I don't think Vince. I've never heard of Vince giving anyone creative control except in this instance, and that's another thing. Obviously, that's kind of skeptical, right? I personally don't think creative control is good from a business standpoint. If you're a promoter or booker, things like that, you need to have autonomy over what's going on. Now, guys can say no. I mean, there's been plenty of guys that say no, and you kind of move on or find a middle ground or whatever. You work together, but at the end of the day, there has to be one guy, like I've said, that says, this is what we're doing. If you don't want to do it, then there's the door. And I've had to say that several times, unfortunately. But, yeah, everything feels, like, why was Brett in the documentary, when him and Vince have that one last meeting, right? Why was Brett mic'd up? Why? First of all, let's back up in general. If the camera's on and it's on Vince McMahon, then you're not going to get a real Vince McMahon. He's working that no matter what it is. When he's sitting there talking to Brett's family, he's like, you're going to be bigger than your dad one day. Stuff like that. I mean, that's so. And even after the screw job where they go into the locker room and apparently Brett punches Vince. Punches him in the face. Like, I saw a thing with Kevin Nash, and Kevin Nash said, hey, Vince McMahon didn't sell for the United States government when he was on trial for steroids. He didn't sell when he blew both of his quads out. But for some reason, he's going to sell one of the boys giving him one punch in the face and come out of the locker room stumbling and staggering like he is. Like, I don't buy it. Same thing here. Like, I just think it's all too neatly wrapped on some cases, but it's a great work. You understand, because everyone believes it, and I think that's why they believe it, because no one really knows for sure. It's Brett and Vince. It's really down to those two guys. Now, I heard Chris Kanyon one time in an interview say that Brett had told him when he was in WCW that, yeah, man, it was a work, but that once again, that's hearsay and conjecture, so we don't know, but. I just think it's so fascinating because, like I said, we don't know. But for me, looking at a business standpoint, I just think they're, like I said before, I think they were both way too smart to put themselves in those bad situations that, because like I tell everybody, when something goes wrong in wrestling, it's not because one thing went wrong, it's because three things went wrong. You understand? Like when something catastrophic happens, someone breaks their orbital bone or something like that, it's not because one guy messed up, it's because three things happened in a row. You understand? So that's kind of what I'm thinking here. Like, I think they worked this entire situation, so they could both come out with more money on the other side. Vince obviously had more money freed up for other talent and to go in a different direction, and Brett went on to WCW to make more money than he was going to make in WWE and have his quote-unquote nest egg and retire or whatever.
All right, well, you got into something else. You used the word nest egg. I kind of thought of it almost thinking, going down this line of reasoning, I almost thought it was almost a golden parachute. And there was a particular quote at the latter part of the documentary, Wrestling with Shadows, that kind of made me think in this fashion as I watch it 20 plus years later. In really the closing scene, you see Brett and Stu walking over the front yard toward the house, the dungeon, so to speak, as it was known. And the phrase, and I hope I got this accurately, Brett referred to what happened as a, quote, fitting in to the hitman character. Now, I thought that was an interesting phrase to say, considering someone who just signed a multi-year contract with a major wrestling company. He was describing this situation, and he was talking about a fitting into his character. Well, do you think, this would play into it, and I guess you can say, hey, do you think maybe he was thinking this way too? Hey, I just signed this big money deal with WCW. I'll go out there, maybe not with his heart totally into it, and there's some other quotes who led me to believe that also, that this is his retirement plan, so to speak.
Yeah, and also in that same little part right there, he actually says he never sold out and he never lost his integrity. Right? And here's something really interesting. At the beginning of the film, he says that the Bret the Hitman Hart character always stood up for what's right and never gave up. right? That was what that's what the Bret Hitman Hart was to him. And what happens in the actual finish, he has to give up, right? Even in the Screwjob, and even the finish itself. Hey, it's all, like I said, way too smart for this to happen. But hey, Shawn Michaels is going to put you in your own finish, the sharpshooter, and then you reverse it. Milk it for 5-10 seconds there, and then then reverse it. That's way too, like, how can someone not see that a mile away? Like, if he was worried about getting screwed, like we talked about when when he talked to Earl Hebner. Earl said he wouldn't screw me. You know what I mean? But you still put yourself in a situation to where you had no. He put himself in the situation to be in the sharpshooter, to be in a submission hold, to where the referee could call for the bell. Like, if you were really worried and paranoid about something like that happening, you would never allow yourself in a situation like that. You understand? You would not allow yourself in any kind of hold or anything like that, or you'd be looking for a fast count and stuff like that too. You understand? You would be on your toes to where, that stuff wasn't a factor.
And and to go along with that, one of the other things that stuck out to me is, as he was describing going to WCW, the way he phrased it was, he said, "I was finding myself lured to WCW." His heart wasn't in it. He referred to Vince McMahon as a father figure in that, and the family atmosphere. And in the documentary, they play up his family's involvement with those folks. So that was very interesting. And I guess one of the things I'm thinking about is, in that documentary, it was portrayed that, in my opinion, and see if you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Bret Hart was portrayed as someone who had grown very disillusioned with the professional wrestling business, its fans, and the direction it was going in general. Do you think that was legitimate? Do you think that was in his thought process that, hey, maybe this isn't for me anymore?
Yeah, I mean, when the writing's on the wall that, hey, we're going to go in this Jerry Springer, ultra shock wrestling kind of direction, yeah, I could see myself, especially myself, as as a wrestling purist, go, well, I don't want to go in that direction, and I don't want the Bret Hart character to be living in that world either. You understand? So yeah, it would make sense to kind of bow out and go another direction. And like I said, if that's the direction the business is going, then why not go to WCW and make a killing, make some money, and hit the road jack, that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, and another thing like that's interesting to me is, like, I really think that they both thought that they would both come out babyface. Okay, let me rephrase that. They each thought each other would come out babyface. Right? Bret thought he would be the babyface in the situation, and Vince thought he would be the babyface in the situation. I know a lot of people's thought process is Vince was doing this so he could be the ultimate heel, right? But I really think Vince thought, well, I'm going to be he's going to be the heel in this. I'm going to be the babyface in this. He'll go to WCW as a heel when he needs to be a babyface, really, and that'll hurt them. You understand what I'm saying? Like, I really think they both hashed out this situation, and they both thought they would both be babyface. But it turned out they were kind of both heel. Obviously, Bret was more babyface than Vince, but Vince came out, as the number one heel out of it all because, to them, they screwed out. He screwed over his own employee.
All right, that's interesting. And along that lines of the direction, also in that documentary, he was saying in interviews that he was given publicly, he referred to what they were doing as smut TV. And that seems very odd to say something, but it was apparently his viewpoint of the direction it was going. And you mentioned about making Vince McMahon a heel. And very quickly, I know that, and this is tough. I want to, in effect, give Bret Hart a little bit of credit in this aspect, because through this incident, I believe he made the Mr. McMahon character the biggest heel anywhere. And I would argue that all the way back at WrestleMania 13, he made Stone Cold Steve Austin arguably the biggest babyface. Now, later on down the road, there's what came to be known as the Austin Mcmahon Era. Mm-hmm. I mean, is it reasonable to say that Bret Hart is responsible for kind of creating what became the Austin McMahon Era?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing, especially if he booked this situation like we think he did. If he worked this situation like he did, I imagine Brett always wanted to be the king, as far as like Hogan that drew all the money and be the king. But what if he ends up he's actually the king maker? What if he ends up not only did he make Austin, like you said, he flipped him baby, but he also made Vince the biggest heel. So he ends up ushering in the biggest era that they had as far as that kind of stuff goes. So it's a very interesting thing. And like, if you guys take away anything from this episode, I want it to be this. I can't say definitively that it was a work. No one can. You understand? Like, if Bret Hart and Vince McMahon are the only two people that could come out and say it, and we would 100% believe it, right? But I want you to think there's a thing in the court of law that kind of goes like this. It's if one thing is false, then everything is false, right? So if there's one bit of information in this thing that you go, I think he was lying about that, then if he can lie about that, then why can't they lie about everything else, right? So like, I really want everybody to just if you don't believe us, that's fine. You're not hurting my feelings. I'm pretty thick-skinned after all these years, but just listen to this with an open mind. Go back and watch Wrestling Shadows and look at it from the standpoint, if they were going to work this, how would they do it? This is kind of how they would do it, So that's my belief. What about you, Mark Tipton?
I do find myself in the camp of thinking it was just far too convenient. The only thing that always puzzled me was, did the documentary maker know he was playing into a wrestling angle? I think he may have been just a convenient accident.
I think everyone was just innocent bystanders. I think everyone else's reaction is as real as it gets, but it was Vince and Brett, being the puppet masters that they are, playing the situation to help themselves and their business do better. And I think that's a fitting end right there for this edition of the 30-Minute Midas Touch. I am your host, the Golden Boy, Greg Anthony, and with me as always is my co-host, Mr. Montreal, Mark Tipton. And we will see you next week right here on the 30-Minute Midas Touch.